Hello, welcome to Miss Peepers Reading Corner. I'm Katrina, aka Miss Peepers, and this is Baroness T'Challa von Schnoodle, blending in with my t-shirt. And we're here to talk about banned books. Throughout the month of October, we are dedicating all of our videos here at Miss Peepers Reading Corner to banned books. The goal here is education. What books are banned, why are books banned, and why you should be able to decide what you want to read rather than to let someone else decide what you are allowed to read. Today, we are discussing a trilogy, and that is The Lord of the Rings by J.r.r. Tolkien, or possibly Tol-keen. I've heard it both ways, but I've been saying Tolkien for a really long time. So that's probably the pronunciation that is going to come out of my mouth. These are mass market editions. I just got these because I have a big single bind up of all three. But I really like these. And this just goes to show that I think a lot of people look down on mass market paperbacks because they are less expensive and they're not always nice. A lot of times they look mass market, but then sometimes they look really cool like these. So don't judge a book by its publication status, I guess. The Lord of the Rings is the quintessential fantasy novel. And while it was definitely not the first fantasy novel, it absolutely defined the genre. Tolkien was a professor. He was an expert in history, in linguistics. He also fought in World War II and came back to find his country very changed. He was British. All of these influences show up in this work. The Lord of the Rings is also a very clear influence on Dungeons and Dragons. It has influenced so many other writers, some in a good way and some not. Tolkien is often considered the epitome of fantasy writing. These books were published in the first half of the 20th century, and so there are definitely parts of them that are dated. Tolkien used his particular skill set to craft this narrative. These books are long, they meander, they're filled with rich, detailed descriptions and poetry and songs, and so much world building that the world itself is not contained just in these three books, or even these plus The Hobbit, which is a prequel to this trilogy, but there are whole entire volumes dedicated to just the world of Lord of the Rings of Middle-earth. But let me tell you what this book even is, because I'm here assuming that everybody is familiar with The Lord of the Rings, but I know that's not true. I travel in nerdy circles, and so for me, everyone's familiar with this. But in case you are not, The Lord of the Rings follows a number of different characters, but I'd say probably the primary storyline is about a young hobbit named Frodo Baggins. Now, hobbits are small beings. They are about the height and build of human children when they are full grown. They live in a peaceful, idyllic community in a place called the Shire. The world of The Lord of the Rings is called Middle-earth. And one day Frodo inherits a ring, a magical ring from his uncle, and learns that this ring has an immense amount of power, more than his uncle even knew. There are wars being fought over this thing, and it needs to be destroyed because it carries the potential for true evil in it. And so Frodo takes on this task with the help of others to walk hundreds of miles across Middle-earth so that he can take this ring to the top of a volcano called Mount Doom and throw it into the lava so that it is destroyed. It is an epic storyline. It is an adventure of immense proportions, but Tolkien also focuses on the individual characters. So while there are massive events going on around Frodo and his traveling companions, and they sometimes get involved in those things, ultimately this is a story about people. It's a story about good versus evil. It's a story about wanting to do the right thing and what the cost might be of taking a stand against evil. It's gorgeous. It's beautifully written. And so it has risen up as sort of the standard of fantasy writing. I don't think it's the standard. I think it's a standard. There are a lot of different ways to write a fantasy novel. This is not what this video is about, so I will not get too far into it. Tolkien had a very specific skill set that allowed him to create entire languages for the different people, the different communities in this book. There's an entire elf language. There's an entire, I think he wrote an Orcish language as well. And you can, if you choose, learn Elvish and speak it. People have done this. I have not. People have done this. That took so much attention and so much care, and Tolkien was good at it, and he wanted to do it. We also see a lot of copycats, and I'm not gonna name names because I don't want to list someone's favorite fantasy author and rag them in this video. That's not what this video is for. But there are definitely authors that have tried to do something like this and not done quite as well, because not everyone has this confluence of skill sets. There are many ways to do fantasy. This is just one. There are many ways to do fantasy well. This is just one. Amongst fantasy readers, this is a beloved trilogy. And not to say that everybody loves it, because it takes all sorts. Not everyone likes the same things, but this is very much revered in general amongst fantasy readers. That said, not everybody is happy with Lord of the Rings, and I don't just mean people who dislike it for a number of reasons. It is long. It is long. There are a lot of pages here. There are tangents because it has multiple storylines. If you don't love all the characters, you're going to find yourself spending a lot of time with characters you don't really care about, waiting for the next character to show up. Some of the structure could be different, and a modern writer might have arranged it a little bit differently. That doesn't mean it's wrong. That doesn't mean it's bad, but not everybody likes that, and that's fine. Tolkien did not really do a whole lot with the female characters. There are a couple. There aren't many. There's definitely a misogynist social structure. There is a little bit of commentary about that. Not as much as a modern reader might prefer, but still it's sort of there. Most of the characters in here are male, and that's been a criticism of this book. But none of these things are the reasons that this book, the series, has been challenged, banned, censored. One that I find a little bit frivolous is that it does feature people smoking, so it is considered to encourage smoking. The films got a bit of pushback for this reason as well. Gandalf the Wizard, who is a very prominent protagonist in this story, loves to smoke a pipe. All of the hobbits generally like to smoke pipes. They also drink alcohol. That's in here too. These books were written in the 30s and 40s. People smoked all the time. I'm not saying they were right to smoke. I'm not saying one should be encouraged to smoke, but this is representative of what people did in the time period. And at this point in our society, if you don't know that smoking is harmful, whether you choose to smoke or not, like, how did you miss that message? It's everywhere. But people like to wring their hands and clutch their pearls. One of the things that really gets to certain challengers is that they feel these books are irreligious or offensive to Christianity, to the point at which in 2001 in New Mexico, a church actually burned copies of these books because they were offended by the apparent anti-religious attitude. Now, this is fascinating to me because J.r.r. Tolkien was devoutly Catholic, and openly so. And Tolkien at one point even wrote that Lord of the Rings is a fundamentally Christian and religious work. And if you think about some of the imagery of this ring of absolute power bringing evil and destruction and tempting people towards evil, the third book is actually called The Return of the King. Returning kings, that's a big Christian image right there. A fun fact that I learned while I was doing a little research for this video, J.r.r. Tolkien, who was friends with C.S. Lewis, the writer of the Narnia Chronicles, among other things, was a fairly large influence on Lewis's decision to convert to Christianity. I find that fascinating because C.S. Lewis I've always thought of as a Christian writer. It's fascinating to me that Tolkien, who influenced Lewis and himself was a very religious author, has been judged for being anti-religious. And a lot of the pushback for this, and this has hit a lot of fantasy novels, is that there is magic and good magic, which I'll put in scare quotes for you. I mentioned Gandalf the Wizard. He is a wizard. He casts magic. There are evil wizards as well. There are people casting magic for all sorts of reasons. But this idea of potentially good magic or good spell casting is so offensive to certain very religious Christian groups that they can't see a Christian message behind any amount of magic. And that is a theme throughout a couple of the books that we're talking about this month. And that is why this book is regularly banned in Christian-based private schools, as well as religious communities in their public schools. But to me, these books ultimately encourage the reader to stand up to evil, to do what's right even when it's difficult, and to recognize that morality is not an easy thing to navigate. Being good or taking good actions are not always obviously beneficial to the person doing those things. Sometimes the right thing is to make a sacrifice. And we see that happening, and we see those sacrifices sometimes rewarded and sometimes not, unfortunately, just like real life. And these books also point out that you don't have to be the strongest, you don't have to be the biggest, you don't have to be the most powerful person in order to make a positive difference in the world around you. And that, I think, is probably the most important message of these stories. So have you read Lord of the Rings or anything else by J.r.r. Tolkien? What did you think? Let me know in the comments, and either way, I'll see you in the next one.